What is up, guys? Thank you so much for being here. So today I'm gonna try and not fall off this rock that I'm balancing on, but also I want to talk about variable ND filters and why I think that it's like really a must-have to step up your cinematography game, or if you're just going for a higher quality video. I'm gonna give you my 3 reasons why you have to have a variable ND filter. Quick before I get into my 3 reasons, and they're not in any particular order, but I wanted to mention that the reason I decided to make this video here is, one, I'm on a road trip and this was just one of the destinations, but I thought it would be a good place to make this video just because it's so bright, and that's when variable ND filters really come in handy, is when you're out in bright sunlight or just any super bright situation, and I'll get into the reasons why. But yeah, and if you guys know where I'm at, go ahead and guess in the comments down below. I don't want to tell you guys because I just thought it would be a little bit more fun if you guys tried to guess. Alright, so reason number 1 is so that you can maintain that like shallow depth of field, and that's where, for example, I'm in focus but the background is slightly out of focus, and you can't do that without an ND filter because otherwise you're going to mess up your shutter speed, or you're going to have to really like crank your aperture to like f11, f13 to make it darker, or even f20. At that point, you're just not going to have that shallow depth of field, and if you mess with your shutter speed too much, then your footage is not going to look like smooth and cinematic and natural. And what I mean by that is, say you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you're going to want your shutter speed at 1/50th of a second. In order to do that in a bright situation like this, you have to have an ND filter, otherwise everything's just going to be blown out and all the highlights, everything's just going to be super bright. And typically, even if you're just doing like an interview or you are trying to do like a cool B-roll sequence, and regardless of what you're doing, you're still going to want to keep that natural motion blur, and you just can't do that in the bright sunlight without an ND filter. So that's reason number 1. And I'll give you a little example as what I mean. So right now I'm in focus and the background is a little bit blurry, and you'll be able to tell because if I move, now everything else should be in focus. And if I get back in the frame, now I'm in focus and the background's a little bit blurry. We'll try it one more time. And now I'm back in the shot. So you should be able to tell the difference there. And it's just, once again, that's one of the things that people do to kind of make their footage look a little bit more professional. And yeah, so you want to maintain that good shallow depth of field. It's getting a little bit windy out here, so sorry about the wind noise, but I wanted to give you an example as to how it looks without the ND filter on there. So right now I don't have the ND filter on, and there's not really any depth of field because I have it on f22. So you're not going to see the background being any different whether I'm in the frame or not, because everything's in focus. So it's not a bad thing, it still looks decent, but if you're trying to have that shallow depth of field, especially with like a different kind of lens, because the lens I have on, it only goes down to f4, which isn't that shallow. That's why the background doesn't get super blurry. But if I wanted to use one of my lenses that went down to like 1.8 or f2, something like that, and it'll really make the background blurry, then you would notice it even more. But again, you wouldn't be able to do that because it lets in too much light and it would be way too bright. So what I have here is everything's in focus, and I don't have the ND filter on there right now. But anyways, yeah, so it can be done. It's just, if you really want to get a shallow depth of field, again, you won't be able to do that. I'm just going to shove this in with reason number 1, is having the proper motion blur. I kind of mentioned that already, but as you can see right now, I don't have proper motion blur. Everything should look a little bit choppy because it's at 1/800th of a second, because now I am at f4, which is the shallowest depth of field that this lens goes, but I have the shutter cranked to 1/800th of a second in order to compensate for all the light. Now the motion blur is all jacked up, so I have good depth of field where the background is a little bit blurrier than I am, but yet, sorry, my lips are super dry. I've been in the desert for like a week. But anyways, but you'll see that the motion blur is all kind of jacked up. So everything is just super choppy. There probably isn't any motion blur like you would see naturally. You know, with when you move your hand, you see a little bit of blur. That's just another example And so we're gonna try it with the ND filter back on, and you'll see what natural motion blur looks like. So now we're back on with the ND filter. We're back at f4, and we have a 1/50th of a second for the shutter speed. So we've got a little bit of blur in the background and a natural motion blur. As you can see, my hand should look a little bit blurry and not as choppy as it just did. And that's the way we see things in real life, and so it just gives it that more natural look, and that's what they do in movies. And so it's just more cinematic, it's more professional, more high quality looking. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little bit subjective, so if you wanted to have that look for some reason, of it being a little, I don't know, unnatural or choppy or whatever, then you can go ahead and do that. Sometimes for certain scenes, certain movies, they might do that in like small like takes. Like they won't film the whole movie like that, but they might just do that for a certain portion if they're going for a certain look. But overall, you're gonna want that natural motion blur. To wrap up reason number one, even though I kind of already wrapped it up earlier, I'm just kind of shoving it all together, is just the overall look of your footage to make it look professional and high quality, and to have that shallow depth of field and that proper motion blur. You gotta have an ND filter if you're out in the bright sunlight. So it looks like I have to hurry up if I want to be able to show you guys an example with reason number two. But reason number two why I say a variable ND filter and not just an ND filter, and in case you don't know the difference, a variable ND filter allows you to like change the amount of darkness, the amount of light that it lets in, versus just an ND filter, which is a set amount. And so anyways, the reason you need a variable one, and I gotta hurry because I'm about to have cloud coverage, but you can see how bright it is. And so when you go into like a dark area, for example, and there's a small, whatever you want to call this, it's not a cave, but if I go into there, you'll see that now everything is way too dark. But with a variable ND filter, I can just turn this. I mean, it might be a little bit dark still, but it should be way brighter than it was, and you can at least see me clearly, versus it just being completely dark and, you know, you can't really see me. And so if you didn't have a variable ND filter, it shouldn't be shaking because I'm on a gimbal, but if it is, it's because I'm on a gimbal and it's hard to hold with one hand. Oh, I'm dripping sweat too. But anyways, I'm putting in this work for you guys to try and make this video. But yeah, the reason you guys need a variable ND filter is because if you didn't have it and you went from a light area to a dark area real quick, or vice versa, then you would have to like change out your ND filter or just take it on and put it back off. I mean, take it off and put it back on. But anyways, this just makes it so much more convenient. But yeah, say you're going from inside a car to outside a car, or vice versa, inside a house or outside a house, any situation like that, a variable ND filter just makes it so much more convenient and quick. If everything's convenient for you, then you'll probably make a lot more videos, because I mean, who wants to do something knowing that it's going to be inconvenient and drag on and take longer than it needs to, right? And so in my opinion, having the variable ND filter, it's also a little bit motivating because it makes my job easier, or my hobby I should say, but it makes it easier to make videos because I don't have to like go back and forth taking things on, switching things out or whatever. So that is a huge reason to me to have a variable ND filter. Reason number three has more to do with photography. Say you want to take like a long exposure photo of like a river flowing, you want to make that water nice and creamy or whatever. Well, you can't really do that and still maintain shallow depth of field without an ND filter of some sort. It just really helps with photography and long exposure photos so that you can maintain that shallow depth of field and blur out. Say it's a car too. You could be getting a car that's driving really fast and you want it to have a little bit of motion blur. Again, having an ND filter, you can go to a shallow depth of field so that it's in focus and the background's out of focus, but then you can still have a lower shutter speed because you have an ND filter on there, and so you can see a little bit of the motion blur of the car. So those are the three reasons why I think a variable ND filter is just a must. And people will say, well, you don't need a variable ND filter, you can do all those things with just an ND filter. But once again, that's a set amount of shade basically that you're providing your sensor. And so you have to be able to have multiple ND filters if you don't have a variable one. And so that's why I say it's a must-have to have a variable ND filter. Kind of going back to what I was saying, it just saves you so much time and space, and you're not carrying around a bunch of these different filters. You just have one that you can rotate, and it kind of does everything for you. and it just makes your whole life when it comes to photography and videography a little bit more convenient, which should help you to get more done in less time. So variable ND filter is the way to go. The one I have on is a little bit expensive, but I'll put some different links in the description down below of different options. So I'll put the one that I use and I'll mark it as that, and then I'll put a couple other options that I know are really good options as well that cost a little bit less money. But yeah, if you got the money, I definitely recommend the one I'm using, which is the Peter McKinnon one. It's by Polar Pro. But yeah, there's some other good ones, like I said, and I'll put all that in the description down below. And I put it there as a convenience to you, so you can just click on the link and it takes you straight to Amazon where you can buy it. But also it helps out my channel because Amazon will give me like a small percentage at no cost to you, so it really helps out my channel. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed and you like photography related things, especially like lens reviews or gear, any kind of stuff like that, then definitely hit the subscribe button because I'm going to be putting out a lot more videos in the future. Also, if you guys could hit the like button, it's like a super small simple thing that you can do that really helps out my channel, so just go ahead and do that. It'll literally take you like 1 second. So thanks again, and thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.